All right, they're saying that the I guess the exfil from Aleppo is continuing. The evacuations of thousands of civilians of Syrians in eastern Aleppo resuming on Sunday after faltering for days, having left many to sleep in the streets in sub-zero temperatures and in bombed-out buildings. I've posted a couple of things on my on my personal Facebook wall having to do both with some of the realities of war and the children who are being bombed and the result of what's happening over there, and then also of kind of the devastation, the before and after pictures of Aleppo, and I think it's Syria in general, Damascus and some of those places. But the point I was trying to illustrate is this is an ugly business, and you need to really understand what the result of your personal opinions are, what your policy positions are. So when you advocate for these kinds of things, for war in the Middle East, you need to understand what that means, because it's not just going out there on a battlefield where there are good guys on one side and bad guys on the other. This is a guerrilla war. This is an insurgency. Imagine someone fighting a war on your city street. Now, you got nothing to do with it. You're just caught in the middle of it. And people are dropping bombs on your kids. And you need to understand what kind of enemy that creates and what kind of hatred and anger that creates. And the other thing that you need to understand is how this all started. So for those of you, I'm going to give you a very quick rundown without getting into too much specifics on how this evolved. The U.S. government has for years been actively engaged in trying to create a more hospitable Middle East and more favorable Middle East for America. It has nothing to do with what is best for the region. It has everything to do with what is best for America and American allies, specifically Saudi Arabia, but having to do with other countries as well, Qatar and others. And so we invaded Iraq on faulty intelligence, the same intelligence agencies, by the way, that now tell us Russia is behind the hacking incidents that may or may not have led to Donald Trump's election. Faulty intelligence about weapons of mass destruction. Now, even if he had them, there was absolutely no rationale or logical reason to go into the Middle East to attack Saddam Hussein, but we did it anyway. And at the time, in full disclosure, at the time I was a young man in the Marine Corps, and I was all for it. After I got out of the Marines, I went to Iraq for about 5 years, and I learned the truth, and I'm happy to share that with you now. So we destabilized Iraq, and in so doing, we created a vacuum. Now, we tried to install a president that was favorable to us and that we thought would be a good dictator. He ended up being a weak and cowardly man. And essentially we poured hundreds of billions of dollars into Iraq in infrastructure and training their military, in outfitting them in order to take care of themselves, to pick up the mantle and defend their own liberty, to have free elections. And it turns out that the people in Iraq really didn't want those things. I know it's hard to believe, but there are people in this world who really don't want liberty. They don't want republic or democratic rule. They just want a benevolent dictator. That's what they believe they need. And during this time, we had an insurgency spring up in Iraq, and Al-Qaeda began to form up in that area. They tend to form up wherever there's a fight. Now, we played this cat and mouse game with them for years, where they were moving around and we were hunting them down, and they were making advancements, and then we'd beat them back a little bit. And then we had the surge. You guys remember the surge, where we put all the new troops in, and turns out we ended up beating them back, or we thought we had beat them back. And we all the politicians who want to criticize Obama for the action he took in Iraq will use the surge as their example for how Barack Obama failed so miserably. Because the surge worked. He should have never pulled those troops out. The truth is, the surge didn't work. What the surge did was take all of those fighters who were fighting in Iraq and shift them to Syria. Because these fighters, they're not tied to one particular group. They'll fight for whichever group seems like they have the highest probability chance of being successful. So after we pushed them out and we pushed back al-Qaeda in Iraq, that diminished and we saw an uprising in parts of Syria. We also saw problems in Egypt and Libya. And America started going on this campaign of ousting evil dictators. They thought this would be a good idea. We'll get rid of the dictator in Egypt. What happened after that? What happened after that was we got the Muslim Brotherhood and people's heads on spikes in Egypt. Egypt was finally stabilized through essentially a military coup. The military came in and stabilized things. It's still a wreck over there. In Libya, we got rid of Muammar Gaddafi, and now Libya is wrecked. But in Syria, we started to see the forming of this group called ISIL. And ISIL was both fighting the president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, and also fighting some of the Kurds in the south and fighting some of the Iranians. And so they kind of had their hands in just about everything. And we also had some good Syrian rebels, or people we thought were good Syrian rebels, also fighting against Assad. And we really wanted to get rid of Assad, we Americans. And so what we started doing was arming anybody who was fighting Assad, which also happened to be this new group, ISIL, that was forming up. John McCain was part of this. I didn't pull the clip today, but you can go online and you can hear John McCain talking on Fox News about how every single one of the security analysts said that we ought to be arming ISIS. And this was the idea, was we'll arm these groups, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, this whole thing. And what ended up happening was as soon as America pulled out of Iraq, this group ISIS, which was now formed, well outfitted and trained, started to push back down into Iraq against a weak and cowardly Iraqi army. And that Iraqi army failed miserably, and ISIS was able to take over all the weapons and equipment and everything that the Iraqi army left behind, because many of them just walked away. They just ran from the equipment and the Humvees and the anti-air and surface-to-air missiles and all of the other stuff that they had out there. They just walked away from it. And ISIS just came and cleaned it up. They ended up taking over large portions of northern Iraq. The Kurds have managed to hold them off a little bit. In places like Yemen, we are actively supporting ISIS in the fight against the government there, or the lack of government, I guess, there. The Saudis are actively bombing those that are trying to fight ISIS, and we, of course, are supporting the Saudis. There's a great interview I did with Scott Horton on this very subject. And now we find ourselves in a situation where Syria has just been destroyed. It's being hit on all sides. It's being hit by us and our allies. It's being hit by the Russians. It's being hit by the Iranians. And you still have people, after all of our meddling, after all of our intervention, you still have people saying that the reason Aleppo is in the dire straits that it is because America has not been a leader in the Middle East. I want to slap somebody when I hear him say that. The reason this is happening today is a direct result of American action. It might not be the sole responsibility of America, but it has a lot to do with American action. It is because of the things that we have done. It is because of the wars we have started. It is because of the bombing campaigns we've run. It is because of the intervention and the ousting of dictators, the meddling in foreign affairs that we have been part of as America, that Aleppo now finds itself in the position that it's in. And yet on Scarborough, I believe this was this morning, He's talking about some of the pictures coming out of Aleppo and wonders if this has something to do with American inaction. Listen to him.
Those pictures are just unspeakable.
That's a legacy.
That's where we are.
I mean, that's a legacy, Elise, of America and the West. We sat back. We did absolutely nothing. This is what, here's some life pics coming out of Aleppo. Is this not what the world looks like when America does nothing?
No, that's what it looks like. The world looks like when America meddles in somebody else's affairs. When it thinks it knows better. When it wants to remove this dictator here and put in this dictator there. When it decides it wants to use its military might to change the landscape of the Middle East. But the guy who takes the cake, the guy who really gets in my craw, is John McCain. This guy has never seen a war he didn't want to be part of. No, not a war that he particularly wanted to fight. No. He doesn't want to go fight in them. He just wants to start them. And this is what he had to say about what was happening in Aleppo today. Go ahead.
But look, Jake, what's happening here, when we see the seizure of these ships, when we see the cyber attacks, when we see the dismemberment of Syria, when we see the tragedies that are taking place there, which are heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking, while we sat by and watched all this happen, this is the sign of a possible unraveling of the world order that was established after World War II, which has made one of the most peaceful periods in the history of the world. We're starting to see that, the strains and the unraveling of it, and that is because of an absolute failure of American leadership.
Listen to me, folks. The destabilization in the Middle East, the end to peace, whatever he was talking, it's a complete lie, too, by the way. It was one of those peaceful times in world history after World War II. There was a period after World War II where everybody went kind of back home and licked their wounds.
We kind of had to rebuild some things.
Yeah, because there were literally millions and millions and millions of people died. And the world had to take a breath to reset. But all of the violence, the unraveling that he talks about, he is the creator. He is one of the chief orchestrators of that. He has been on the wrong side of every single foreign policy decision that we have made in my adult life. And the man is, I would love to have him come on this show. I would love to get my chance to ask him a bunch of questions. This is Jake Tapper asking him questions on his some hack show that he does. Why doesn't anybody? You've got half a dozen producers working on your show, Jake. How about you do this? How about you take one of them, you have them do some actual real research, and you create some really powerful and compelling questions that will challenge John McCain on his track record of foreign policy. Because the man's a boob. He's an absolute buffoon when it comes to understanding foreign policy. The man knows nothing. Every step that he's taken. First, he wanted to arm ISIS. Then he wanted to arm the good rebels. Every single step this man takes ends in disaster. And yet he's still considered some kind of foreign policy genius. His opinion is still given credit as though it matters. He's one of those guys. Yeah, you ever watch The King of Queens? It's on at night, and sometimes when I can't sleep, it's on from like 10 to midnight. And so I'm watching this show, and it's got Stiller, not Ben Stiller, but his dad. What's his name? Neither one of you yahoos. I need to ask somebody who knows something. But Ben Stiller's dad is on the show and plays the old man. And he goes into the coffee shop. And the coffee shop has figured out that everything that he does ends up ending in disaster. So they start figuring out, hey, we're going to ask him what we should do, and then we're going to do the opposite. So they ask him a whole bunch of questions like, should I bet on the Knicks or the Spurs tonight? And he goes, the Knicks all the way. So he's like, put it all on the Spurs, right? Should I ask my boss for a promotion? Yeah, no, don't do that. And so she goes in, I got the promotion. So they're asking people should do that with John McCain. They should ask John McCain's opinion on foreign policy just to figure out and do the opposite. If John says we ought to be funding the rebels, the thing we should do is not fund the rebels. So do the exact opposite. He still is saying that Assad has to go. I still don't understand why. No one can explain it to me. No one is even bothering to ask the question. Where's Jake Tapper with that one? You keep saying Assad has to go. Why? Why does he have to go? You know, if you stop the bombing with this and you let the Russians come in and just help to defend Assad, that this would all be over in a matter of days, right? That there's no way that this insurgency of ISIS and the good rebels, as you call them, that we know now are nothing but just another form of ISIS, that those guys would be wiped out and we'd still have a stable Syrian regime. Why you keep saying that he's got to go? Well, because he's an evil dictator. And no, I get that. So is Kim Jong-un. So are half a dozen other people around the world. Why are you fighting that fight? What are we supposed to go? Is it our job to oust every evil dictator around the world? Is that our job? To send our boys over there? Have you seen the pictures of the children whose parents are gone? Have you seen the parents holding their dead kids in their hands as they run through the city? This isn't like it's coming from Palestine where they set this stuff up just to make it look bad. No. These are people right after the attack. This is real raw footage of people whose lives have been wrecked because of your foreign policy. For what? I want to know why. I want you to tell me why. He can't. He doesn't have a freaking clue. Because to him, it's about something different. And so when he talks about they're just heartbreaking images, I want to smack him. I want to grab him by the tie. I want to wrap it around his neck. And then I just want to slap him. Open hand slap. Keeping my pimp hand strong. Because it's so disingenuous. And so cowardly. To not come out and at least be able to admit that you are responsible in large part to the situation that those people now find themselves in. That it's your foreign policy decisions, the things that you advocated for, the things that you pushed that led to where this country is now. Oh, they're heartbreaking. What we need to do is go drop some more bombs over there. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.